Hey everyone, welcome back to Underreported Stories, where I cover the news that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News fail to report on or don't report on enough. Okay, well, let's start off hot because CBS has decided to rewrite Holocaust history in a viral interview between CBS anchor Margaret Brennan and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So, this exchange all started after Vice President J.D. Vance gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference where he just obliterated European leaders for the censorship regime that is happening across the West. And he specifically said that the security threats in the Western world are a quote, threat from within. Now, I can't tell you what's in JD Vance's brain, obviously, but most likely what he's referencing is this crackdown on the freedom of speech across Europe. We see it in Europe with these new speech codes that make hate speech a violation of law. And then you saw in Germany, we very recently reported on this, I believe it was the end of December, where we were reporting about a woman who complained about an immigrant who sexually abused a child. And the woman who complained about this abuse got a longer punishment than the immigrant who committed the assault. Those are just some examples of the threats that J.D. Vance was perhaps calling out. And yes, I think it's fair to say that they are incredibly problematic. But for whatever reason, the left-wing media has no problem when in America, the IRS, the Department of Justice, when those bureaucratic organizations are weaponized against conservatives because conservatives are, quote, domestic terrorists, that's totally fine. That's a threat from within that we're okay with tackling. But the second that J.D. Vance says a lack of free speech is problematic in the Western world and there's a threat from within to hinder that freedom, when that comes out of J.D. Vance's mouth, then it becomes a problem. So, in an effort to stick to the regime talking points, Margaret Brennan revised history to claim that free speech was weaponized in Germany to carry out the Holocaust. Let's watch this exchange together.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to.
So because J.D. Vance was in Europe and history happened in Germany and was associated with far-right extremism, which it's very political, inherently political to say that because someone is on the right, they are therefore associated with far-right extremism and Nazism. That's a huge stretch. That because that happened, J.D. Vance is what? Saying that everything that happened in Nazi Germany was somehow okay? Like, that's a stretch, Margaret. That's a stretch.
Disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
What a classy way to handle this. Like, I feel like in this interview, we don't actually talk enough about the comeback that Marco Rubio has had, really playing good cop in the entire world stage right now on behalf of the Trump administration. But he's doing a real good job. He made a huge comeback from, what was it, Tiny Hands Marco or whatever he was getting called, Sweaty Marco, whatever Trump was calling him on the debate stage back in 2016. This Marco Rubio, huge difference. Now, I wanted to pull up an example to really exemplify how free speech operated under the Nazi regime, because the first thing, if you have a modicum of understanding about this time and period of history, is that the first thing the Nazi regime did was start to silence people. And of course, a resistance did operate. It was commonly known as the White Rose. It was a nonviolent intellectual group of people who It was led by 5 students and one professor at the University of Munich. And this group would pass out leaflets and campaign in opposition to Nazi Germany. This existed across countries that Nazi Germany occupied, namely France. Was very powerful story by the author Kristen Hanna, telling the story of how this opposition worked in Nazi Germany, not only in Germany, but within, all the occupied territories of that time in 1942 and 1943 specifically. But of course, when the members and supporters of this group carried out these and distributed these pamphlets, these people were imprisoned. They were executed. There was no opposition. So to say that free speech led and was a characteristic of that regime is, again, just so ideologically opposed to general history and basic facts. But J.D. Vance came in and responded to this. He said, "This is a crazy exchange. Does the media really think the Holocaust was caused by free speech?" Apparently so. In my opinion, I honestly think that Margaret Brennan was producers gave her a packet of information, and then it was her job to really understand the intricacies and the ins and outs in a piece of paper or two, or a small packet that her research team did for her. And she didn't do the adequate research on it. She was just kind of scrolling and perusing her notes as she was going through this interview in hopes that whatever she said would be adequate opposition to her dumb, in her eyes, opponents. And I just think that was silly preparation on her part. Elon Musk did respond to this and said, "One of the first things Hitler did upon gaining power was apply aggressive censorship, as explained and exemplified by just one example of the White Rose group." This was also an interesting line of conversation that came out of this was Matt Beebe, I don't know, the Matt Beebe. We follow each other. Seems like a nice guy. I've never met him in person. But he responded to J.D. Vance about this and said, "Sir, with all due respect, you legitimized this pseudo-journalist when you gave her your first interview out of the gate. I can't be more thrilled with how things are going, but you need to stop giving credence to the water carriers for the old regime. Fully embrace the new media." Yeah, I get what he's saying. It's like the new media has a role in this, and maybe, just maybe, it shouldn't be, the administration shouldn't be legitimizing this. But at the same time, I do feel like the old guard, the old media, it needs to learn its role in all of this. In the age of new media, I think that people like Margaret Brennan, they should be able to, and they should ask difficult questions without revising history or trying to fit their narrative or agenda into a conversation. If people have horrible ideas, if Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance have awful ideas, they will be fleshed out, especially in that new age of media where the majority of response and criticism comes from people responding to news segments just like this. But as always, let me know your thoughts on this back and forth in the comments. Okay, another big story I wanted to get to before we get into all the underreported stories is this new narrative that's really being set mostly on TikTok, a little bit on X, but mostly on TikTok, that Donald Trump's new tax plan will not deliver on his key promises, namely his plan to not tax tips or overtime work. Now, I just wanted to clarify all of this because it's important. And sometimes I was scrolling through TikTok and I was like, wait, seriously? This doesn't sound right. I don't believe it, but I basically did all the research so that you don't have to. So here are the facts that you have to combat this narrative that's taking place online. So the tax plan that is being discussed by these social media influencers on TikTok about the Trump tax plan, it's not a bill, okay? It's not something that can be signed into law. What it's called is a concurrent resolution, and a concurrent resolution is different than a bill. It doesn't require the signature of the president. Basically, it's used to set the annual budget and the spending goals. So it's kind of like something you would get from not necessarily HR, but your boss before a meeting. They send you an agenda. They send you the goals for a budget meeting for fiscal year 2025. That's kind of what this current concurrent resolution is. And so, yes, in the concurrent resolution, which is about general goal setting, there was no specific mention of taxes, no taxes on tips in this one specific concurrent resolution. But that does not mean that that action item will not be included in a tax plan, which hasn't even been revealed yet. So when these influencers are freaking out online, I'm like, you guys, nothing's even been put in place yet. Simply the concurrent resolution has come out about the plans, the general guidance. And that is, I will say, whether you like it, whether you hate it, it's a, it's kind of a minor point. It's a big campaign promise, but it's a minor point when you're talking about millions and millions and millions, billions of dollars of spending and goal setting and agenda setting. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, oh, it's not in this first concurrent resolution, therefore it's not happening. The Trump administration lied to you. I find that to be just moronic. I'm trying to say words, not say certain words. Anyway, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt then went on a press circuit and reiterated that no taxes on tips is still a top priority for the administration and something they will be pushing through Congress. Watch this clip and see for yourself.
So these are the tax priorities of the Trump administration that the president has laid out for members in that meeting today. No tax on tips, which is obviously a very public campaign promise that the president made. No tax on seniors' Social Security. No tax on overtime pay. Renewing President Trump's 2017 middle-class tax cuts. Again, these are the president's priorities. Adjusting the SALT cap. Eliminate all the special tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners. Close the carried interest tax deduction loophole. Tax cuts for Made in America products. This will be the largest tax cut in history for middle-class working Americans. The president is committed to working with Congress to get this done.
Now, mind you, they could look us in the eyes and totally lie to us and not deliver on this campaign promise, but that is just yet to be seen. It is not a fact, as influencers on TikTok have been saying. Anyway, let's get to our docket. Here's what we've got for you today. We have border smugglers in Canada. They are putting out ads on TikTok promoting human trafficking into the U.S. I also want to take a look at Pete Hegseth's bombshell claims against the Biden administration's IRS, and we have some DOGE updates as well. So without further ado, let's get into the 5 underreported stories that you need to know. Today's show is brought to you by my merch line, Based. I'm an independent journalist, and the best way to support this show is by purchasing a hat, a hoodie, or the new Based Not Basic tote, or really any item from the Apparel collection. Instead of asking you guys for donations to fund my independent journalism, my business partner and I created a line of merch called Based Apparel. Based means you're the opposite of woke. It means you're based in logic, you're based in truth, you get it. Head over to basedinlogic.com to check out our latest apparel. My personal favorite right now is the Based two-tone shirt. And remember, when you buy merch, you are directly supporting this show. Thank you, friends. It's hard to know what information to trust, especially when information is released faster than it can be verified. And a lot of reporting nowadays favors very clickbait content over high quality journalism. And that's why when I am prepping for this show and when I'm reading the news day to day, I trust and use Ground News. It is an app and a website that combines news from all different sides of the political spectrum to give you the facts and see where the media is exaggerating, sensationalizing, or underreporting news. And I mean, like, come on. It's like they made this app for you and I. So when you use the link in my description, you'll get 40% off of their Vantage subscription, which, by the way, I'm not just selling this to you guys. I pay out of my own pocket because it's such a worthwhile venture. So head over to check.ground.news/Chrissy to get informed on the go. There's a link in the description. And I actually found our first story on Ground News's website. So human smugglers are using social media, namely TikTok, to promote illegal crossings from Canada to the U.S. These coyotes, you guys, they are getting brazen in the actions that they're taking. They've been targeting Indian nationals, this is according to the New York Post, and promising hassle-free smuggling into the U.S. for about $5,000, which, again, it's kind of odd the way that the free market is working in this, because obviously it's a lot more difficult to get into Canada than it is into Mexico. But hey, if you can get yourself into Canada and then we want to smuggle through the U.S., it's half the price than doing it for $10,000 at the Mexican border. Kind of nuts. If you could, that's like the bare minimum you could be saying for that. So these trips that they have, you can meet these smugglers in Montreal, suburban Toronto, Surrey. It's kind of near Vancouver. And basically, these cartel members, I mean, they're not Mexican cartel members, but they're like coyote cartel members. They deliver the migrants into either upstate New York or Washington State. And they've just gotten so brazen in their action and kind of PR of this. And these TikTok accounts have just information about how to cross into the border with pictures of the illegal immigrants, as well as testimonials from people who got into the US, and they talk about how easy and comfortable the journey was. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. I remember back in 2021, I went to the southern border, and there were some news outlets that were there to just record and witness what was happening, such as myself, and I was with the Daily Wire at the time. Then there were other teams and other journalists who were very much there to like help people across the border. And one of the Border Patrol agents said that it, no matter what kind of media it was, but more often it was the media that was like helping people across, that was the best PR for the cartel, was showcasing how easily and how often these trips into America happen and how successful it was. So this PR is not necessarily new. It's not necessarily like brazen to TikTok. This has been happening for years and years and years. It's just to a point where people are showcasing their faces. You know, when I was there at the southern border, the Mexican cartel men were blocking their faces from the light. Whereas in this instance, it's just people smiling. Actually, let me pull up some of these TikTok screenshots so that you can see. This one says, CAD to USA, DM me serious with the American flag, and then Montreal to New York, same day entry, 100% safe route, safely reach new group, payment when you happy, which you only pay when you're happy in America. I have sincere doubts about that. This next one says Canada to USA, safe. Then it gives contact information, all payment after reach, same day reach. So basically, hey, come to the cartels in Canada and we'll get you across into America. You just have to pay us $5,000 and we'll get you in there in one day. This last one says Montreal to USA, low price. And it's just allegedly illegal immigrants that are being put in these TikTok videos. Now, obviously, I think it goes without saying, President Trump has a keen ear to news stories, specifically outrageous news stories like this one. So I'm very interested to see whether this story has an impact on his decision to impose that 25% tariff on Canada as he has threatened. You know, those tariffs were not just let go, they were just put on hold for 30 days. And I believe that was as of February 3rd. So in the next 15 to 17 days, those tariffs could very well be imposed again if Canada's $1.3 billion border security plan doesn't address a very prominent issue like this. And obviously, I'll caveat that with, American Border Patrol and ICE needs to spend more resources on our northern border as well. But at the same time, if Canada would just do their parts and stop the cartels that operate within their country, our country wouldn't need to utilize those resources on the northern border. So in favor of Trump's plan, I'm hoping that it works. And I really do hope that a story like this reaches his desk, because usually when something outrageous like this happens, President Trump tends to take action. Okay, let's get on to our next story, which is coming out of New York. Speaking of New York, so 4 top deputies of New York City Mayor Eric Adams have resigned. This was yesterday, Monday, February 17th. They resigned after these corruption charges against Eric Adams were dismissed. So, under the direction of the new Department of Justice Attorney General Pam Bondi, the DOJ dropped charges that were filed against Eric Adams back in September of 2024. And to be clear, I think this is important, and if this irks you because it doesn't align politically, I mean, these are just the facts. So don't let the facts get under your skin. The DOJ did not say that they were dropping the case because of a lack of evidence against Eric Adams. It's not that the evidence is non-existent. They said they were dropping the case because it was hindering the election process. And I believe you can make an argument for both, right? You can make an argument that it is unfair to target people who have been involved in maybe perhaps corruption, right during an election year, that political aspect of it is unfair. Simultaneously, the people deserve to know. If the voters don't have all the evidence for or against the person they're voting for, that's also a form of election interference as well. So you can make an argument both ways, but what's happened here is there's been a narrative spun now that the Department of Justice and Eric Adams engaged in a quid pro quo. You probably remember that phrase a lot from when people were accusing Donald Trump of engaging in a quid pro quo with Zelensky, Ukrainian President Vladimir, whatever his name is, Zelensky. Can't speak today. Anyway, it's basically a tit for tat agreement. And so the argument has been that the Department of Justice dropped the bribery charges against Eric Adams in exchange for his cooperation with ICE and immigration enforcement, even though New York City is technically a sanctuary city. Now, personally, I can understand how someone comes to that logical conclusion. I do think it's a logical conclusion. I don't think it's an unfair characterization at all. But it's also wild to assume it without proof. Like, there is no categorical proof that the federal government, that Tom Homan, our borders, are engaged in some sort of quid pro quo with Eric Adams. Now, I'm open to that being a reality. I understand how on the outside that seems like a logical conclusion, but there's no proof. There's no finality to that, which leads me to wonder, why are these deputy mayors stepping down now? What is it about February 17th? And that's where things don't add up for me, okay? If these deputies genuinely thought that Eric Adams was or is corrupt, wouldn't they resign when they knew about the corruption while it was ongoing? Wouldn't they resign when the corruption charges were unveiled against him back in September? Wouldn't they take issue with the allegations of corruption at the forefront? No. Probably because it's political. I believe that Democrats look at a free-thinking man, and again, I can hold space in my mind that he's a corrupt free-thinking man, but Eric Adams is aligning himself politically with the right on immigration issues, and as soon as illegal immigrants were threatened, then the far lefties like AOC came out of the woods, came onto CNN, and started decrying Eric Adams and taking issue with the corruption. Again, I'm no sycophant for him. I don't care whether Eric Adams I care whether he is corrupt or not. I don't care the consequences of his actions. He's not like some hero to me. I'm not going to be the conservative that says, oh, well, he's the enemy we know and he's willing to work with us. Let's work. No, like if he's corrupt, send him away. I don't care about him. But I find it annoying that Democrats rode Eric Adams' coattails in silence for 6 months until all of a sudden illegal immigrants were the result of this. Like bad things, quote unquote, in the Democrats' minds. Bad things happening to illegal immigrants, aka ICE coming in and circumventing these sanctuary city policies. So in light of all of that, Governor Kathy Hochul has convened a meeting with key leaders in the state asking for Eric Adams to resign. And a lot of people are wondering, well, like, how does that work? How can Kathy Hochul just come in, convene a group of people, and force Eric Adams out? So I did a little bit of research on it. And procedurally, what it looks like is, according to the New York City Charter, there's a court-like process for the governor to remove the mayor. So Kathy Hochul would hand down charges. Eric Adams would have the opportunity to defend himself, so on and so forth, until it was ultimately decided. And again, is it by a board of trustees? Is it by a jury? It's very unclear. But these removal powers, the reason why it's so unclear is they haven't never been used. Like the city, this is completely unprecedented territory for the city. That's all I can say. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I'm going to follow up on this. I really love reporting on stories like this because I have no dog in the fight. If Eric Adams goes to jail, if Eric Adams doesn't go to jail, if immigrants get detained because Eric Adams doesn't go, I just am willing to see it play out. I have no dog in this fight. And that's kind of my favorite. Anyway, let's move on to our next story, which is that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has accused the Biden administration of targeting his family with a, quote, rushed tax audit. So Pete Hegseth posted this picture. It's a picture that he posted to X of what appears to be an IRS letter sent to him and his wife. The document specifically said that the family owed $33,558 in federal taxes that needed to be paid immediately. Now, caveat, I use those two words so much, but it's true. Like, how else do you say? Also, it's really unclear what the timeline of all of this is. Pete Hegseth could have received this letter 2 years ago and is deceiving the public for political capital. It's possible. He could have gotten it in the mail this morning, and it's a holdover from the Biden administration's priorities or internal IRS staffers who have a distrust of Pete Hegseth. We don't know. We truly don't know. Pete Hegseth could owe $0 to the IRS. He could have $33,558,000 in unpaid taxes that he owes. So we don't know all the facts quite yet. Also, one more. Elon Musk could have found that in his IRS investigation and given it to him, and it was never sent. Okay? We don't know all the answers. Would love them. Hope people ask for answers. I would assume we have a very transparent White House for now. I would assume that they'd be happy to cough it over. I would assume Pete Hegseth would be willing to cough it over. Here's what we do know, though, for a fact. When a former Biden administration official was asked about this off the record, the response wasn't, oh, well, we don't weaponize the IRS, or, well, this wasn't done at our discretion. It was, quote, this is a vain attempt to distract from how the richest man in the world is rifling through Americans' personal finances and Social Security information. It was not, we did not do that. It was, yeah, we did it, but do you see what Elon's doing? That's not okay. That was basically an admission of what was happening. Again, not final, not proof, but an indication of where things are going. And I think the reason the deflection like that happens is because when the IRS does target people, the average American feels that. They get scared by that. They are afraid that something like that will happen to them because of their political ideology, and they will become more in favor of DOGE, of Elon Musk, of the efforts to audit systems that abuse and create fraud against Americans. So, honestly, I don't think the Democrats realize how unpopular it is to push for corruption when all the White House is trying to do right now is push corruption out. You can take issue with Elon Musk as a person. You can take issue with Elon Musk's political ideologies. I'm not going to stop you from that. But taking issue with fighting fraud, it's a wildly unpopular opinion. I want to preach it to the Democrats, but at the same time, I'm like, well, if you haven't figured it out now, I don't know if you ever will, and I don't know how you're going to win midterms when you think that advocating for corruption, for abuse, for the weaponization of the IRS against incoming secretaries of defense is a good thing. If you love this podcast, then you will absolutely love the Underreported Stories Substack. It's an email sent straight to your inbox Monday through Friday. You'll get an in-depth analysis of stories that are underreported, hot takes from me on the biggest news of the day, and Underreported Wrapped, where I'll let you in on personal updates, big news that flew under the radar, and you'll get a few pictures from America's Goodest Boy, my dog, Harper. Check out the link in the description to subscribe for free, and while you're down there, be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a 5-star review. But speaking of corruption and DOGE, our next story is that the official DOGE X account put out a list of all the grant money that the U.S. was supposed to spend and that the government has now since canceled. And I want to pull this list up for you because some of it is so ridiculous you wouldn't even believe it unless you saw it. Again, this is from the DOGE X account. There were not screenshots on this, but I am taking this at face value. If there are any implications, any changes to this that are not entirely 100% true, I will be happy to come back and retract anything that is said here. So again, this is just from the DOGE account right now. It says that we have spent or we're planning on giving a grant of up to $10 million for, quote, Mozambique voluntary medical male circumcision. So $10 million for men to get voluntary circumcisions in Mozambique. Because why wouldn't we as Americans be paying for men in Mozambique to get their dicks chopped? $9.7 million for UC Berkeley to develop a cohort of Cambodian youth with enterprise-driven skills. It just, like, you're kidding, right? $2.3 million for strengthening independent voices in Cambodia. Okay? What determines the strength of them? What determines the independence of them? Is it people with a liberal viewpoint? Is it people with a conservative viewpoint? Is there politics in this grant money? Is this being funneled to leadership in Cambodia? What is going on there? $32 million to the Prague Civil Society Center. $40 million for Gender Equality and Women Empowerment Hub. Is that in the U.S.? Is that abroad? Where is that? $486 million to the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening, including $22 million for inclusive and participatory political process in Moldova and $21 million for voter turnout in India. I just want you to think and reflect on the 2020 and 2024 elections about how we've been told that there's suppression, issues, problems in both of these elections, regardless of your political ideology. And the fact that we spent nearly $500 million on other people's elections while failing to adequately secure our own says a lot. Says a lot about the fraud and corruption that's going on. Moving on, it says $29 million to strengthen political landscapes in Bangladesh, $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal, $19 million for biodiversity conversation. Is that conversation about climate change and biodiversity in Nepal costs $19 million? $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia, $14 million for social cohesion in Mali, $2.5 million for inclusive democracies in Southern Africa, not South Africa, all of Southern Africa. $47 million for improving learning outcomes in Asia. What is Asia? Is that India? Is that China? Are we spending $47 million to improve the learning outcome of China, our biggest enemy? And then $2 million to develop sustainable recycling models to increase socioeconomic cohesion among marginalized communities in Kosovo, Roma, Ashkali, and Egypt. We're spending $2 million to develop recycling models that help with social cohesion? To me, this might be a hot take. This screams money laundering to me. There's no way it costs $500 million to get people to turn out to vote in India. Like, that screams money laundering. It screams rich, powerful, elite people getting kickbacks for these kind of grants. And we've seen that take place, by the way. A prominent, I believe where was he? He was a D.C. councilman facing 15 years in prison for getting kickbacks for giving grant money. I have a feeling that we would see a lot of that, and I sincerely hope that the Department of Justice is investigating how these grants came to be and where the money followed the trail of money. That's what I need to see. The effort that the right put into the Hunter Biden laptop, I'd love to see them do for all of these kickback schemes, because I'm just going to assume, again, don't have 100% proof, but I'm going to assume that if you did a pretty deep dive, you would find some kickback schemes in at least one of these countless programs. Okay, let's get to our final story, which is also DOGE adjacent. So the U.S. government is set to spend $1.5 million in taxpayer funds on a far-left group's LGBTQ mentorship program, where basically a bunch of adults come in to mentor 12-year-old LGBT-identifying kids in Los Angeles. The goal of the program, as stated by the program, is to put, quote, queer youth with parents who aren't accepting of their identity with a mentor who has that same identity. Now, the story in and of itself is, it's underreported, it's a little crazy, but I think it begs the question, why is it the role of the federal government to put together a youth program for people in LA. That should be a project that is put together using private funds or local resources. So I'm critical of the story, don't get me wrong, but what I found to be more interesting about the story than the actual core of the story is how the new media, in this case it was the investigative team over at the Daily Wire, is uncovering and doing work for DOGE in a seeming, I can't say this as truth, seeming effort to assist the DOGE team. And I think a lot of this information that's out there is very publicly available information that a research team or an investigative journalist put it together, write an article about it. But this money is yet to be spent. It's a grant that the money hasn't been doled out. Therefore, there is a chance that Elon Musk or the DOGE team will see this and enact change before this money is spent. It was a grant that was doled out by the Department of Health and Human Services, so we will see whether that agency can cut the spending. But I noticed immediately that this is going to become an ongoing theme in conservative news circles. There's going to be finding and showcasing fraud cases that DOGE hasn't gotten to yet, which is going to expedite the agenda. I'm not opining whether that's good or bad. I just noticed it, and I know that that is going to be thematic of a lot of the news that we consume for the rest of the year, probably. Anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. If you're a real one and you made it to the end of today's show, will you drop the newspaper emoji as an homage to our first sponsor, Ground News? I will see you guys back here on Thursday. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your night/Wednesday, and we'll see you here tomorrow. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment about how beautiful, intelligent, and funny I am. And if you want more content, click right over here for more videos and clips of my show. I'll see you back here next time. Bye.